Hello, my name is Frank Wilkinson from SEI's Institutional Group. Joining me today to talk about the process of finding and hiring an outsourced Chief Investment Officer, or OCIO, is Reid, Assoc.Vice President Finance for Moravian College. Founded in 1742, Moravian College is a private liberal arts college located in northeastern Pennsylvania with an enrollment of just over 2,000 students. Today, the College and Theological Seminary Endowment Fund holds over $100 million in assets. In 2016, the school's leadership team and the investment committee began a process to find an investment management partner to suit the ever-changing needs of the organization. In her position, Anne has administrative responsibility for the endowment, so naturally led the entire process working with the investment committee. With that, we welcome you, Anne, and thank you for taking the time to share your OCIO search experiences with us.
Thank you, Frank. It's nice to be here.
Okay, Anne, so let's begin with some background information. What was your investment management process prior to beginning this whole entire search?
Well, we used traditional management consulting with a very, very large firm. We were happy with the service we received. The returns were not what we liked. And the consultant, who I found fine, didn't really mesh with a lot of the members of the committee. So we knew it was time to at least issue an RFP. And at the same time, I questioned seriously whether traditional consulting was appropriate for us. The level of discretion was something that had to be discussed with the committee. But I felt that an OCIO model is something we should certainly look into as opposed to what we had been doing.
Okay, so you felt this was something that you should look into, so you had a committee now of how many members?
We had 14 members.
14 members. So you have a committee now of 14 members that you have to try to convince this is the approach that you want to take. Did you give any thought to issuing an RFP for maybe both a consultant and an OCIO, or?
Well, our committee is a very passionate committee, and the members all have very, very diverse opinions about things, and I think doing that would have led to probably 50-50, okay. And then you would have continued the arguing, and that was really one of the main things that I felt, main reasons we needed an OCIO is that each tiny little investment decision that was brought to us created so much discussion and argument that it really, we were getting nowhere, and by the time we made a decision, the opportunity had passed. So the real challenge was making all of the members understand the value of OCIO and what it would bring to them. And
how much effort went into that?
Well, actually, what I did was I called a special meeting because I felt it shouldn't be mixed in with, certainly with the consultant there you didn't want, but I didn't want to mix it with other business, so I called an interim meeting and we sat down and we talked about the benefits and the negatives as well of the OCIO process. And I basically said, we're not getting out of here until we decide. I had no stake in the game. I certainly had a favorite, but if we came out back at traditional consulting, that was fine with me. I just wanted everyone to agree that this was the way to go, because otherwise you're doomed to failure with your search.
Good. So you accomplished that. You got the whole committee in agreement that this was the model that you were going to go for. So what were the specific types of services you were looking for in an OCIO?
Well, the primary one was the level of discretion. We wanted the OCIO to be able to rebalance as quickly as possible, to make new investment decisions for us, so that to focus the committee on a higher level, so that those large asset targets, that's where we wanted to be, and then let the OCIO come in and do the day-to-day management of those allocations to keep us on track and make sure that we met our investment goals. Because when you're only meeting quarterly and you're making decisions, you're almost always doing it in the rearview mirror, and you really doom yourself. Sometimes you're lucky and it works out, but this way we wanted more timely decisions, better use of our assets on a regular basis. Okay,
good. Yeah, you wanted to truly outsource the discretion and make sure that it was going to be exactly what you wanted. Okay, good. All right, so you were successful at getting the committee in agreement that you were going to go for a search for an OCIO, and now you had to start the challenging process of a request for a proposal, or RFP. So let's start with, a lot of organizations now are using outside assistance in running this search, whether it's an OCIO search provider or some sort of advisor. Did you consider that or use that in this process?
We did. We used actually a management consulting firm. It was the management arm of our audit firm.
Okay.
And they were very, very valuable in the, I would say, the qualitative aspects.
Okay.
It's hard when, I've been with the college for 24 years, so I know all the members of the committee. I know them personally. And it was very nice. The committee gave me a full vote in the process, which they don't have to. I'm a staff member. I'm not a member of the board. Well, as someone who's voting, I didn't really think it was appropriate for me to really run the process. I wanted it completely independent. So they were wonderful at bringing the committee together, creating a list of criteria, and then talking through them to get sort of tease out any biases that anyone would have and then talk about them. That's very difficult as a staff member to do. So that was extremely, extremely helpful.
Good. Did they help you build the RFP?
They did. They drafted the RFP. In retrospect, I think I should have spent a little more time in that process. It was a little bit cutting, sort of a standard RFP, and I think I could have made it a little better.
A little more focused.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then in terms of issuing the RFP, was it an open RFP or did you select certain types of firms to respond to it?
No, we ended up selecting 9 firms, 8 plus the incumbent. And 4 of the firms, my chair and I had dealings with these firms for quite a while, just gotten to know them ahead of time. And then the other 4 came from either members of the committee or the consultant actually brought one firm in.
Okay. So you issued it to 9 and then all 9 responded?
All 9 responded.
Okay. So now you have 9 RFPs to sort through and
it's
figure
at least
out.
this big.
Exactly. So what was that process like? How did you get through that and how did the outside management firm help with that?
Well, they stopped at that point because
Okay.
we only had a limited dollar amount to be able to spend on the consultant. So basically they issued the RFP and then I ended up being the one the committee and I to evaluate it. We have an in-house grid that we use, a process to evaluate RFPs for building projects, for anything. And it basically takes the criteria, and each member of the committee, and only 10 people were on the final decisions.
Okay.
Some of them took themselves off. Understandably, when you see this many things to read, I wish I could have. But and then each person ranks 0 to 5 the importance of those criteria, and then we bring them all together, we average them, and that was the basis. And then you can, at least for the more quantitative aspects, you can drop your numbers in there, and that helps give you a sense of which firms are going to rise to the top, which firms are deserve a second look. And sometimes you have we had one that just ended up in the bottom, so that was an easy
eliminate.
So it's not decisive, it helps you. Everybody wants numbers, you want to get your arms around it, so that helps.
So how many firms? So you had 9 that responded, and then what did you kind of pare it down to at that point?
We had 9, and then we pared it down to 4.
To 4, okay. And how long was that process from when you, I guess, even started to build the RFP to when you pared it down to 4?
We started in February. We issued the RFP in the beginning of May.
Okay.
And we spent most of June and part of July plowing through them and figuring out who we were going to bring in.
Okay. So it was good because it was, being out of school, you had nothing else to do in the summertime, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, the auditors,
they
said,
RFPs.
we'll wait. We'll just
Exactly.
sit on the step until you're done.
Okay, that's great. Okay, good. So your auditors obviously weren't too happy, but you had a stack of RFPs that you had to get to, so that's how you spent your summer. Looking back at the RFP process, are there any regrets or things you would have done differently, or what would be a major piece of advice that you would give to someone who's about to go through this process?
Number 1, do an RFI before you do an RFP, which I didn't know they
existed.
I just found out about those a little late. But that, to me, that would have probably automatically eliminated 2 of the firms. It would have been down to 7 to start, which would have been much easier to handle. The second thing is I would, a lot of the information is qualitative, and I ended up putting it all on a spreadsheet. Well, in retrospect, why didn't I just include that spreadsheet in the RFP and let the firms drop it? You know, date of founding, number of clients, blah 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 blah. And the third thing was returns. We were not specific in the time frames of the returns and how the return should be shown and explained. And that was then I had to actually reissue another set of guidelines to everyone and say, I need you to fill in this information.
To get an apples to apples comparison.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, we issued it in May, so I had 331, 1231, 630, you name it.
Yeah. And you didn't even think to be that specific when you
No,
were
I thought
issuing it.
everybody knew what I wanted,
Right,
right?
exactly. Okay, good. All right, Ann, so you spent your summer looking through RFPs and you somehow pared it down from 9 to 4.
Right.
The paring down, was that an investment committee vote to get it down to 4? How did that pare down process work?
What we did, as I mentioned, we had a ratings sheet, and we looked at that, and that allowed us to take 2, probably 3 of the firms right off the list because they just scored so low in everybody's vision. So those were gone, and one of them actually didn't really do OCIO. Again, that would have been an RFI.
Right, okay.
Something would have been teased out in the RFI. So that left us with about 6 or 7, and then we continued to discuss it via email, and came out with a strong. There were 4 that we definitely felt. We wanted to have 3. We ended up with 4 for the interviews.
So it was more like a process of elimination versus an actual vote to say which are the 4.
Yes,
Okay.
as one of our members said, the beginning is a process of inclusion, and then this was the process of elimination.
Nice.
So
Okay, that's a
everybody
good way
is
to put it.
qualified. So how do you start eliminating people?
Yeah. Okay, good. So now you have 4. So what was the process at that point then moving forward?
At that point, we brought in all 4 for interviews, and we talked about doing 2 days, 1 day versus 2 days, and we decided to do it all in 1 day because you want to have them back to back. Your impressions are fresh, et cetera. And again, we're dealing with trustees who are volunteers. We didn't want to take up any more, and have read all of these proposals.
Right.
We didn't want to take up any more of their time than we could. So we brought 2 in the morning and 2 in the
Wow,
afternoon.
okay.
Oh, I was
It's a
exhausted.
long day. I was gonna say. And how long were those presentations?
Each of them was 45 minutes and then
Okay.
15 minutes for questions.
Okay, wow,
And then
wow.
we would allow in between about 20 minutes for discussion of that firm.
Okay, and those were positioned as finals presentations to come in and
Yes.
present? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then any outstanding questions that weren't included in the RFP got answered then?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
good. So then you have 4, all 4 came, you had that one very long day, and then what? What happened after that?
After that, so when we finished the 4th candidate, then all of the members stayed, and we talked and talked and talked and talked about it.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
one of the 4, their presentation was not strong, and so they pretty much excluded themselves. So that
Okay.
was nice. And then we were down to 3, and that was a real long discussion because I don't think there was a bad choice among them. It was just a matter of fit.
Okay.
And we ended up there was one firm that was local, and actually the college deals with them on our pension plan and some other things, and they're wonderful. But we would have, I think, doubled their assets under management or something.
Okay.
So
Wow.
we would have been way too much of their assets under management, and we didn't feel comfortable with that. So they were eliminated, and then we had 2.
So at this point, the incumbent was already out of the process?
The incumbent, yes.
Yeah, they were
yes.
out, okay.
They had a great proposal, but there's just too much damage that had
Right,
been done over
okay.
the years.
So, but did you go into that conversation to try to intentionally get down to 2, or were you basically just trying to pare it down from the 4?
We were trying to get down to 1.
So you were trying to make a decision right there. Okay.
But we ended up with 2.
Okay. Okay.
And,
So then what did you do from there to try to get it down to 1?
At that point, the committee basically said either one would be fine. So the chair of the committee said, how about if we do site visits, just the chair, myself, and my boss, the vice president for finance, we do site visits and come back with a recommendation of the committee. So that's what we did.
Okay. So you did the site visits at each firm, and then from the site visit, you came out of that with a clear decision.
Yes.
Okay.
We did.
So what do you think happened on the site visit that differentiated the firms? Because these are the types of things that when you're going through this process, you're not thinking it's ultimately going to come down to being somewhere and seeing or feeling something on site.
That's
So
right.
what was it that you had these 2 firms that you just got done saying either one would have worked? What happened on the site visit?
Well, luckily, the two firms had very divergent approaches to investing. It was basically walking into the offices, meeting the people. It's one of our criteria was gut feel, and you kind of laugh when you read that, but oh boy, did that come into it. It really did. And then the firm that we ultimately chose, we all walked out and said, "This is it. This is it."
And that's so
like
interesting that
it's really like dating. It is.
And that's funny because it's interesting that you talk about this process that starts in February and goes months and months, and you're dealing with stacks of RFPs with a lot of answers, and it feels very, I guess, robotic or systematic, and then all of a sudden it's really coming down to gut in a lot of ways. So the amount of time and effort that you have to put into this, you were probably not thinking the site visit was going to be that big of a deal.
Right, exactly.
More of a formality, you were probably thinking, right? Okay, interesting. So then the final decision, that was then, I guess, a formal vote after the site visits?
With one thing, we had to call references.
Okay.
And so on the final two, the week prior to the site visits, we called all the references that we had. And it was wonderful. I will never, I always take somebody's call if they're looking for a reference now, because that was wonderful. And people were very honest. Well, here's what I like. Here are some things that I don't like. And it was great, because you want to know from the people who are actually, certainly I want to know from the people who are working with them day to day. And then my chair also called some trustees.
Okay.
And that was a big help. So he could see from the trustee standpoint.
And that solidified what you probably felt like you already knew at that point.
Yes, exactly. We were waiting to get a little dirt.
I was going to say a curveball at that point in the process would have.
Well, because we didn't call just the ones that were given to us. We called all of them.
Good. Okay, good.
All of them.
Well, I think that's a lesson, too, in terms of how thorough you were with this whole entire process. The idea that you can't take your foot off the gas until you're actually at a point of...
And there's a firm, and then there's your individual consultant who you're going to be dealing with on a daily basis. And that's really important. So we wanted to hear about him and what he did. And the other thing was the other firm we looked at, their people do consulting and they also do sales.
Okay.
That was difficult.
Yeah.
That was very difficult to see the man who was spending an awful lot of time with us and know that he would be our consultant. But he's going to be spending time with other people. I want somebody who's all mine, or can pretend to be all mine.
And you probably don't think about that until you're there, right?
Don't.
Exactly.
You absolutely do not.
And it is, like you use the term dating, or it is very much a marriage. So the idea of kind of knowing who this provider is and spending that much time and energy figuring it out is a wise move.
Yep. I think there are a couple of key things that people need to remember. One is stay away from your year end. October was a fabulous time. We're at June 30 year end. And I've talked to several people who said, well, it's our year end. We might as well transition then. No, whatever you do, don't do that to yourself, because there is a lot that has to be done. And your auditors would go out of their minds if you transitioned on June 30th, because your trades aren't going to settle till July 2nd, and you're going to be in trouble. So that was big. And the other thing is the firm has to have a dedicated transition team. That is, you can't have your consultant transitioning you and also consulting with other people.
And that's interesting, because you probably weren't thinking that much about that in the RFP process,
we just sold some investments and bought some investments. How hard can that be?
And that's
really hard.
That's the interesting
really
piece,
hard.
that now all of a sudden you go through the process and you realize all these other things.
And you need to decide on whether you're going to have a transition portfolio. Are you going to go directly into a new portfolio? You really can't, because you haven't had a committee meeting to decide what your asset allocation is going to be. So we had a transition portfolio that exactly mirrored the portfolio we were in. And that was a big help. So we sort of we didn't have this funky time when we were either all in cash or all in equities. It was very, very smooth and made it easier to track performance, et cetera, during that time. So that was key.
Okay, good. And that's a good point to make too, because there are some OCIO models out there today that might be implemented consulting where there actually isn't even a transition of assets. So to your point, you hired an OCIO that is actually building funds and is going, and there would be assets transitioning. That's a whole nother factor of this.
And they will some of the firms will take your assets. We were in a lot of Vanguard funds, for instance, our marketables. Well, they'll take the Vanguard funds. We just wanted to liquidate everything. So all the marketables were liquidated, and then we purchased it. That was the cleanest way to do it, and we had been using Schwab, so there were no transaction costs, et cetera. I mean, there are others somewhere in there, but and then for our alternatives, those moved over in kind, and that was pretty seamless. They drafted a letter for me, I signed it, it was done.
So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of
oh my goodness, so much more than I ever could have anticipated.
So is there anything that we missed that you would put out there? I know you said a couple of things that you would offer as advice.
I would say don't rush the process. And even though we received the portfolio or the responses back toward the end of May. I think it was May 25th they were due. And you'd think 2 months to read them would be a lot, but people go on vacation.
Right.
These are volunteer boards, and boy, oh boy, I would never do 9 again. I would do an RFI, narrow it down even further, have more discussion ahead of time, because it was just a mammoth amount of work. And I remember sitting by the swimming pool in July and just reading and reading. And then you get to a new one, and now you don't know who was the one who did this. It's exhausting.
Oh, I'm sure.
So I would definitely be mindful of how much time it takes to read, truly read and understand the proposals.
Yeah. And then, so the timing, you started in February and transitioned in December. Is that right?
November.
November.
1st,
So about 10 months, 10 or 11 months. Okay, good.
Yep.
And that was a lot of time within those 10 months that you had spent doing that.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
good.
And it's, again, the boards are volunteers, and they're not paid. They're not getting paid. As a matter of fact, we're asking them for money. You really need to be respectful of their time, and that's something I would do differently. I would definitely take a longer time to do it.
Good, good. Well, thank you. We appreciate it, and some definitely good advice for organizations out there that are considering going into this process and running this search.
Now that I'm through it, I can say it was great.
So you're
but
not gonna-
going through it, especially when you have a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
As you know, any small firm, we don't have people to do this. It's me. So
Yeah.
it was.
So you don't have the spare time to be offering your help to every other organization that's
You're
out
right.
there. Well, great. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you,
We appreciate
Frank.
it.
It's a delight.
Sure.